Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Derek Mosier. I am a master's student in the John F. Kennedy University Sports Psychology program. And today I just want to go over briefly a little bit more in detail imagery. I'm going to define it for you, talk about a little bit of theory. We're going to go over some certain techniques that you can use in imagery to help make it effective. We will briefly discuss why it's effective, the benefits, and then at the end I'm going to share a imagery script, and I would like you to use the form that I provided for you to sort of gauge where you feel your strengths and weaknesses are as part of your imaging practice. So to begin, I'm just going to define imagery. Imagery can be defined as creating or recreating an experience in the mind, and typically using all of the senses. And we will describe that more in detail in a brief moment. But just to move on to the next, I wanted to introduce some of the theories behind imagery. The first is bioinformational theory, and this was a theory developed by Peter Lang in the late 1970s. And his theory was sort of the first way to describe imagery as an experience, as more of the entire experience that we'll talk about throughout today's lesson. And Lang said that when individuals engage in imagery, they activate stimuli that describe the content of the image and the situation that they're in. So it's really more of the entire process sort of coming together, and that was sort of Lang's bioinformational theory. The next popular theory in imagery is the functional equivalence explanation. And this theory sort of says that imagery causes the brain to activate some of the same areas and processes as when the movement is actually being executed. So to say that in easier to understand terms, imagery sort of has the same functional outcome as the movement itself. So for baseball, for instance, if you are imaging hitting a home run, that imaging experience is going to have the same outcome as hitting the home run. So the movements, the feelings, the senses, they're all going to sort of be the same. So moving on from theory, we're now going to talk about some of the benefits of imagery, how to use it, and what makes imagery most effective. So to begin, we're going to talk about polysensory. And you always want imagery to be a polysensory experience. And what I mean by this is you can see these 6 listed items here. You want imagery to include all of your senses. So the first one that we're going to talk about is visual. Your image should always be something that you can see. So we'll use the example throughout this portion of the lesson of, we'll take a left-handed hitting batter, and what they're going to image is hitting a line drive over the shortstop's head. So in this example of a visual image, you want to be able to see yourself hitting that line drive over the shortstop's head. So see the pitch coming in, see the swing, see the path of the ball flight as it goes over the shortstop's head and into left field. Number 2 is going to be auditory, or hearing. As part of the polysensory experience, you want to be able to hear certain parts of the image. So for instance, when the pitch comes in and you swing, you want to be able to hear the swish of the bat through the air, or hear the ball making contact with the bat. Maybe hear the crowd cheer because you got a base hit. Sort of those types of things. Third on the list is going to be olfactory sense, or your sense of smell. This one tends to be a little bit more challenging for some, especially in the sporting industry. But say for instance, you could take the smell of the fresh cut grass, or the smell of the hot dogs coming from the concession stand, things like that. You want to build that into the experience, because obviously those are things that you can smell during the actual competition. Fourth is going to be the gustatory sense, or sense of taste. This can include things such as the sunflower seeds you have in your mouth when you're in the on-deck circle, or the sweat dripping down your face into your mouth. what you had for lunch. Maybe you had some hot peppers and you can still taste them. So things like that. Fifth is going to be the tactile sense, or your sense of feel. This one pertains more so to maybe grip pressure, or feeling your hands stay inside the ball as you swing, things like that. And then the last is going to be the kinesthetic sense, or your sense of movement. And this one sort of ties everything together into more of an experience. So you want to be able to experience the entire swing. You want to be able to experience your weight shift from front to back as part of the swing. So these six all go into what we like to call the polysensory experience. And with the polysensory experience, what we have with this chart over here is polysensory is going to represent first base for us today. And we will talk more as we go about what this chart represents. So next we have vivid and controllability, and for the purpose of today's lesson I've included them both together. So vividness is going to be the next most important factor when producing effective imagery. And this is going to include all the senses, and you're going to want to make it as much like real life as possible when you're creating your image. And so by having a vivid image, it's just bound to be that it's going to include all the senses, otherwise it's not going to be completely vivid. And the other benefit with vividness is that it also features emotions and physical reactions. And what I mean by this is, take our example of hitting a line drive over the shortstop's head. The emotions that you experience when you get that base hit are maybe some excitement or feeling proud, so include that into your image. And then next we have controllability. Controllability really just represents, are you imaging what you want to have happen? Do you have control over that image? And controllability also allows for manipulation during the imaging process. So say you're maybe not imaging something, maybe you're imaging a negative outcome, or you're imaging, you only have this image of striking out at the moment. Well, if you can display controllability in your imaging process, you're going to be able to manipulate that into getting that base hit over the shortstop's head. So vividness and controllability are going to represent second base here for today's lesson. And then moving on to the next one, we have real time. And what real time is going to do is going to be beneficial because it's going to be most similar to the actual experience. So it's going to be most similar to you actually getting a base hit. You're going to want to create an image that is going to be at the same game speed as it would if it were actually happening. And in order for an image to be experienced in real time, it has to be polysensory, vivid, and controlled. If it's not, then most likely it's not being imaged in real time. And a good example of this, to sort of get away from baseball for a second, would be, we'll take Usain Bolt running the 100-meter dash. Runs it in, 9.3 seconds or something crazy like that. In order for his image to be the most effective, he's going to want to image that race in 9.3 seconds. And then that's going to sort of provide that extra giddy up that he needs in order to recreate that image for himself. So we're going to take real time, and real time is going to be third base today. And then moving on from there, lastly, we always want our images to be positive. And I use always loosely, we'll talk about that in a second. But when your image is positive, similar to controllability, you are imaging something that you want to have happen. If it's not something you want to have happen, chances are probably not so positive. And by imaging positive images, You are helping build confidence for yourself because you're imaging things that you want to have happen, that you see are important, things that you see benefiting your game. So you really want those images to be positive. And positive is going to represent home plate. And so now to touch more on the diagram we have here, this to me sort of represents the entire imaging process. So in order to score a run in baseball, you have to touch first, you have to touch second, you have to touch third, and you have to touch home in order to score a run. Well, in order for your imagery to be the most effective, it needs to be polysensory, it needs to be vivid and controlled, it needs to be experienced in real time, and it needs to be positive. If you can touch all four bases, chances are you're going to have a positive imaging experience, and you're also going to be very effective at it. And it's also going to significantly increase performance. Moving on from there, we have two different types of perspectives that are frequently used with imagery. First being internal perspective, and this is sort of seeing your image through your own eyes or your own lens. A lot of research would say that the internal perspective is most beneficial because you are experiencing it through your own eyes. But really, for today's purposes and the introductory purpose, whatever is easier for you guys to come by is going to be most beneficial. As you experience and practice more with imagery, it might be a little easier to access the internal perspective, but really either or is going to benefit you in the long run. And then obviously the second perspective is going to be external, which is going to be seeing the image through the eyes of a bystander or say a coach, a teammate, your parents, fans in the crowd. So seeing it from a different perspective, maybe watching yourself on TV. So for today, we're going to put internal up by the pitching mound because, say, a pitcher is visualizing it internally, so he's part of the game. And then we'll put external in the dugout. So you're going to be visualizing it from outside of the field, watching it happen, watching it take place. So next, a lot of you might be asking, well, Derek, when is a good time for me to use imagery? Great question. Use it daily. What I mean by this is spend 5 to 10 minutes a day just sort of practicing your imaging skills, maybe developing a game plan for next week's match against your big rival. But it's going to be very effective to use it daily. It's going to be easier to implement in game situations. So if you can lay in bed at night and practice your imaging, it's going to be easier to image when you step into the on-deck circle. It's going to be easier to image when you're standing behind the mound and it's a 3-2 count and you got the bases loaded. So if you can put yourself in those situations daily, chances are it's going to be easier when the actual time comes around. Next is going to be pre-performance routines. This is a great time to implement imagery. It's a great way to sort of develop strategies for the game that you have ahead of you that day. Say you're a hitter, you're the cleanup hitter, and you're facing a guy who has just threw 2 no-hitters in a row, and you need to know what's coming. Well, you can use that time before the match or before the game to prepare yourself for that moment, and really maybe you did some studying on what types of pitches he likes to throw in certain situations. So that's a great time to sort of develop a strategy and a routine of how you're going to attack that day. Next we have post-performance routines. This is a great way to sort of reflect on the day's performance. I have 2 examples for you. You have one where, let's say you went 0 for 3 that day with 3 strikeouts. Well, you can use imagery to reflect on those 3 at bats and maybe pick up on something